Join me in South Africa. I'll be speaking in Johannesburg on the 18th of October and in Cape Town on the 25th of October. And I hope I'll see you there. These are going to be all-day events. I will be giving 4 presentations at each venue, covering a whole range of my work. And in between the presentations, I've made time to meet and talk to people who follow my work, because my readers are very important to me, and I don't just want to be somebody up there on the stage. I want to communicate with you directly and hear from you, so I've made time for that. What will I be talking about? Well, as we all know, one of the main aspects of my work concerns the possibility of a lost civilization. Certainly my best-known book was Fingerprints of the Gods, published in 1995. For the last year and a half, I've been researching a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods that's going to be called Magicians of the Gods. It's a completely new book, not an updated version of Fingerprints, but a completely new book, and that's because in the last 20 years since Fingerprints was published, a whole raft of new evidence has come out which supports, enhances and elaborates upon the lost civilization hypothesis. For example, the intriguing, mysterious megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. What we're looking at there is a series of gigantic stone circles with megalithic pillars, in some cases weighing up to 50 tons, on the scale of Stonehenge, but actually much bigger than Stonehenge. What's been excavated so far are 4 of these circles, but ground-penetrating radar shows that at least another 20 circles, perhaps as many as 50, are still buried under the ground, waiting to reveal their secrets. I've made several research trips to Göbekli Tepe. I've talked with the leading archaeological experts who've been excavating the site, and it's absolutely clear now that Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried about 10,000 years ago for extremely mysterious reasons, and that it stayed untouched ever since then, but that it was actually created 2,000 or more years before that, in other words 12,000 years ago, at a time when our ancestors are supposed to have been simply primitive hunter-gatherers with no ability to organize labor and undergo site planning and architectural alignments of the kind that we see at Göbekli Tepe. It's really a mysterious site, and it helps to set other mysterious sites of antiquity in context. For example, the Great Sphinx of Giza. Back in 1995 with Fingerprints of the Gods, when I and others were arguing that the Great Sphinx might be 12,000 years old, the archaeological response to that, the orthodox response to that, was that this couldn't possibly be so, because there was no other site in the world, large-scale megalithic site, that was 12,000 years old. Well, now we have Göbekli Tepe, made by an unknown people, and whoever made Göbekli Tepe could certainly have made the Great Sphinx. I think we're looking at the work of the survivors of a lost civilization. Then there's Gunung Padang in Indonesia. Until quite recently, it was thought to be a relatively young megalithic site perched on top of a natural hill, maybe just 2,500 years old. But in fact, recent excavations and work with ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing equipment by geologists have shown that that natural hill isn't natural at all. Gunung Padang stands on the top of a 100-meter-high man-made pyramid, which is filled with hidden chambers, and the carbon dating that's been brought up puts it back to as much as 26,000 years ago, in the depths of the last ice age. Excavations are going on at that site now, and I'll be sharing what I think it means in the presentations that I'll give in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. Let's not forget that Indonesia, a string of islands today, was part of a gigantic continent at the end of the last ice age. Could this be the real location of the supposedly mythical, but I believe very real, Atlantis? I also have a smoking gun. I didn't have that when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods. I knew there had been cataclysmic events at the end of the last ice age, but it wasn't possible to pin down a specific event at a specific date that could have destroyed a lost civilization. I have that now. Evidence that's come out in the last 5 years has proved beyond any doubt that the Earth was hit by several fragments of a gigantic comet 12,980 years ago. And those comet fragments initiated a cataclysm, global flooding. They filled the Earth's atmosphere with dust that reflected back the sun's rays for 1,400 years, plunging our planet into a radical deep freeze just when it was coming out of the Ice Age that lasted for 1,400 years, that killed off all the megafauna, the big mammoths, the woolly rhinos, and so on and so forth, and that I believe is the smoking gun that wiped out almost all traces, except in myth and memory, of a great civilization of prehistoric antiquity. So, a lot on the lost civilization, but there will be a lot else as well. As is well known, my interest in psychedelics is a very important part of what I do. I believe that psychedelics are wrongly demonized, that our society is making a mistake in treating psychedelics as these wicked things which we should be sent to prison for using. I'm not an advocate of psychedelics. What I'm an advocate of is adult sovereignty over consciousness and adult responsibility. I believe as adults that we should be free to learn our own lessons and make our own mistakes even, so long as they do no harm to others. And if we're not sovereign over our own consciousness, if we're not free to make decisions over that most intimate, that most personal, that most sapient part of ourselves, then we cannot claim to be free in any useful or meaningful sense of the word freedom. And that freedom, I believe, has to include the right to alter our own consciousness, always without doing harm to others, through using those powerful plant allies that we call psychedelics, because these are undoubtedly the most effective and reliable means for inducing a radical alteration of consciousness, temporary but radical, for getting us out of the alert problem-solving state of consciousness that we use in everyday life and putting us into another state, the state that shamans enter when they enter trance. The evidence shows, and I explored this in my book, Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, that we were initiated into our own humanity, that what we recognize as modern human behavior began mysteriously at around the time that we have firm evidence that our ancestors began to use psychedelics. And that evidence comes from the very specific characteristics of rock and cave art all around the world. Just at the time that we started to do that, art that is the characteristic art of visionary states, that's when we started to think laterally, started to believe in a spirit world, in life after death, started to bury our dead, and did so with grave goods, food and water, which proves that we felt that some aspect of the individual went on after death. Our hunting strategies became better, the tools we designed became better, everything took a huge step forward. And I think we may be making a tremendous mistake as a society by demonizing psychedelics. What's needed instead is a nurturing, responsible, caring way to allow adults who choose to use psychedelics to do so safely and in the most constructive circumstances. And so I'll be talking a bit about psychedelics during the presentations that I give in Johannesburg and Cape Town. I'll also talk about my work on the Lost Ark of the Covenant from my book, The Sign and the Seal, that monstrous instrument that Moses created at the foot of Mount Sinai that struck dead the enemies of Israel. What was it? What was it really? Did it trace back its origins to some kind of lost technology from prehistoric antiquity? I think so. And last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about the spiritual forces at work behind history. Is it possible that some of the terrible events that have taken place in human history, such as the Spanish conquest of Mexico and the extermination that followed it, have not simply come from the individual wickedness of mankind, but from dark spiritual forces, demonic forces, that deliberately seek to misguide us and put us on to negative and destructive paths? I think at least it's a question worth asking. Be there with me in Johannesburg, be there with me in Cape Town, and we'll get into all these questions together.